Hey guys, welcome back to Steel City Sports. So today we're going to be reviewing every game from Week 4 in the NFL. So if you've been following me, doing all my predictions over the past couple weeks in the NFL, I had one of my better weeks of the year. My best week was Week 1, where I went 12-4. This week we kind of got back on track, as now I went 11-5 for this week. So pretty good week for me after back-to-back mediocre weeks. So pretty happy about that. Obviously, I have a lot to say, so let's just get right into the games right now. So, obviously, we started off the week, as always, with Thursday Night Football on Amazon between the Dallas Cowboys and the New York Giants. So, I did have the Cowboys in this one for a multitude of reasons. I told you guys that the main reason why I picked the Cowboys in this spot is their MO over the past couple of years, particularly the Mike McCarthy era in Dallas, where, they've won they went 3 straight seasons of winning 12 games. So their MO in the Mike McCarthy era has been, we come out and we just absolutely brutalize the bad teams. Whenever they play the big teams like the Niners or the Eagles or, like Baltimore, like we saw, they tend to struggle and kind of embarrass themselves, and usually to the shortcomings of either Dak or their super overrated defense. But the MO has been, when they play the really bad teams, they usually not only win, but they usually crush them. And they got out of this one with a win, but it wasn't your typical Cowboys blowout like we talked about last year. In Week 1, when the Cowboys played the Giants, they won that game 40-0. And I was kind of expecting a similar outcome. Even though these are different teams, obviously, they're different rosters. They're very different rosters from last year. But it's still kind of the makeup of the Cowboys to be like front runners. Usually they establish an early lead, and just it kind of snowballs for the Cowboys for the rest of the game. That's not really what happened in this one. I think the first half was really fun. It was a lot more back and forth. We had a lot of passing going on. The Cowboys did an incredible job in the first half of using CeeDee Lamb. They're like, it's not like they haven't been using him in the first 3 weeks, but this is one where it felt like they're legitimately just drawing up the offense around CeeDee Lamb, which is exactly what you should be doing when you're paying a guy, $34 million a year, and he's that level of a player. He's one of the best players in the NFL. You could argue he's the best player on the Dallas Cowboys, so majority of the plays should be schemed up for CeeDee Lamb. And they had a couple plays where they were running CeeDee Lamb at running back. I think that comes back to another point I talked about in my reaction to that game is the Cowboys, if they really want to be a true contender this year, I feel like they need to make a big trade at running back. I don't think it's going to happen because they tend to be a very conservative franchise, and Jerry Jones has made it very vocal that he's kind of all in on the current construction of this team. He had opportunities in the offseason to go after running backs like Derrick Henry, who fucked them up Week 2 or Week 3. I can't remember which week that was. But, yeah, I feel like that is the big missing piece with Dallas here. Because even though they won this game, CeeDee Lamb looked really good in the first half. They didn't use him a whole lot in the second half. The run game, I think, was clearly the biggest problem with the Cowboys here, is because their run game did nothing. CeeDee Lamb with 10 rushing yards was leading the team in rushing yards for the first half of this game. That's how pathetic the production from Zeke and Rico Dowdle really were in this game. Also, another big problem I had with the Cowboys going into this year, I told you guys this was their worst offensive line in the Dak Prescott era, and that was on full display. Relying on a guy like Tyler Guyton, who's a rookie, just had a really bad game here. Had at least 4 or 5 flags on him where he just cost them big. So I think going forward, Guyton has a lot of upside, but they're very thin on their offensive line right now, and that really showed in this one, having to rely on a rookie like him. And the Giants, they definitely showed some fight in this game. It felt like on offense, literally all they did was throw the ball to Malik Neighbors. And it makes sense because that guy is an absolute freak of nature, is going to be one of the best receivers in this game. I have no reservations in saying that. That guy is an absolute stud. But the Giants, they have a laundry list of issues. Their O-line was not good in this game. Daniel Jones kind of relatively had a good game, but it's not like he lit it up either. Their run game was really bad as well. Devin Singletary, clearly a drastic downgrade from Saquon Barkley. Really did nothing. It felt like they would start to get some momentum going with their offense in the pass game, obviously with Neighbors. But anytime they would turn to Singletary in the run game, all their momentum would be stalled. So it's not surprising to me that the Cowboys won this game. It's just in the fashion with which they did it. Because like I said, they usually curb stomp the really bad teams like the Giants. And it was a lot more of a closer game. They had some big injuries in this one as well. Of course, Micah Parsons carted off the field. That's a heartbreaker if you're a Cowboys fan. I don't know the severity. I still haven't heard any updates on his injury. And also, Trayvon Diggs did go back to the locker room. Now, he did come back out. He was sitting on the sideline. But I don't think, you could correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think he went back into the game after that. Now, they did point this out on the broadcast. They do have kind of a long period of time to kind of heal these guys back up because they don't play again until Sunday night. So they have a good long rest period from this past Thursday all the way to this upcoming Sunday night game in Pittsburgh. Yeah, the Cowboys get a good win here. This was kind of a must-win for Dallas. They had to win this game. They could not start off the year 1-3, especially with how feisty the Commanders are looking. And we're going to talk about the Eagles. Even though the Eagles are playing good, they still have a record of 2-2, so they're still going to be in the fray for this division. So, so I got that one right. That puts my record at 1-0 for the week so far. Now we go to the Sunday slate of games. First up I have here is the Broncos at Jets. This was just a really ugly game. Obviously, I picked the Jets here. This felt like one of the layup wins on their schedule, and it just kind of calls back to all the problems I had with the Jets going into this season. Even though I picked them to win this game, this is kind of an inexcusable loss for the Jets. To lose to a team where the opposing quarterback only threw for 60 passing yards is absolutely unacceptable. That is just, you can't even really, it's hard to believe that even happened in an NFL game where the starting quarterback played the whole game, threw for 60 passing yards, and they won the game against the team a lot of people, not me, but a lot of people had as a playoff team in the New York Jets. And their schedule, they got some brutal matchups on there later down the road. So if they can't win these type of games, the layup games where they should be winning, the Broncos at home, I think that kind of spells doom for the Jets. So I think I'm feeling kind of vindicated right now on the Jets. They just don't look like a very good football team. It's not really like Aaron's playing bad. It's just I think the roster as a whole was kind of overrated. They're super, super reliant on Garrett Wilson. He obviously got locked up in this game completely by Patrick Surtain. And once you take away Garrett Wilson, it's just an extremely limited collection of offensive talent. So I was wrong about this one. I think a lot of people were wrong about this one. That puts me at 1-1. I don't take much stock in this for Denver, of course. Denver's definitely more scrappy than I thought they would be. They beat up on Tampa last week. They put up a lot of points, and then they get a scrappy win against the Jets in New York. But I still don't think they're just a very good team. I think anytime they play competent teams, they're going to get rocked, and that's kind of what happened the first 2 weeks with Denver. So I don't take a whole lot of stock out of this for Denver going forward. But congrats on them for a win, obviously. Like I said, that puts me at 1-1. Next up is Steelers at Colts. Obviously, got a lot to say about this one. I'm going to try to not ramble about this one as much because I could probably put out a 20-minute video about this game on its own because it's my team, and I had a lot of issues with this game. So I'm going to try to kind of tame myself and not blab too much about this one, but this just is a heartbreaking loss, and particularly the defense. The defense was one of the most highly touted things of the first 3 weeks of the NFL season. We had by far the best defense in the NFL. When you look at it from a points per game allowed perspective, we were only allowing 8.7 points per game through the first 3 weeks, and we had the lowest yards per game against us in the first 3 weeks. So that got completely exposed on Sunday against the Colts, against a team that looked like they were kind of struggling. Anthony Richardson got hurt in this game. Joe Flacco came out and really kind of carved us up. I do put this loss pretty much solely on the defense because the offense, I get it. They had some turnovers. They had some boneheaded plays here and there, particularly the line that is just decimated with injuries. And it's not like the Steelers' O-line was that great to begin with, but now it is completely ravaged by injuries. And I just felt like the connection with Fields and the O-line was completely off. There were a handful of botched snaps. There was a couple plays where it legitimately looked like the line just didn't know what the fuck they were doing. They didn't know if it was a run play or a pass play or what the fuck was going on. So the O-line was a big problem in this one. Justin Fields did really good kind of in spite of that. And I have to give Fields a lot of credit. Even though we lost in this game, it was not to the fault of Justin Fields. He went out there and played his ass off. He did everything he could in this game on it with his legs, with his arm. Justin Fields continues to really raise his stock in my eye in terms of our guy going forward. You know, he last week against the Chargers had a really good game, and then this week, even though in a loss, still looked really good. So that's kind of one silver lining for me is Justin Fields looks like an NFL player, whereas when he was with the Bears, you guys, if you listened to me last year, I was saying I don't even know if Justin Fields can play quarterback. I don't even know if he's an NFL-level player. I think he is clearly proven with the structure of the Steelers organization and coaching, he definitely is an NFL player, and he continues to rise in my esteem. But yeah, the Steelers, I mean, I've heard a lot of people, if you're not from Pittsburgh, you might not know what this term is, but a lot of people say every year we have like 1, 2, or 3 quote-unquote Tomlin games. And what that means is the Steelers kind of just overlook an opponent in anticipation of the next opponent. Because next week, like I said, we play the Cowboys in primetime in Pittsburgh. That's going to be a massive game. There's going to be a lot of eyeballs on that game. So I feel like this happens. You know, I even talked about this in my prediction video before the season even started. When I predicted the entire Steelers schedule, I said there's going to be 1 or 2 games this year that are Tomlin games where we just kind of overlook them. It's a game we probably should win. I mean, the Colts had a lot of key injuries to themselves as well, and we just went out there and the defense was embarrassing in this game. The defense was absolutely pathetic. It was Swiss cheese. It was getting carved apart by AR and Joe Flacco. So not a very fun time. I will give them credit for having kind of like the will to stay in this game because I can't remember if they were down 14-0 or 17-0, but there was a massive deficit to start off this game. It'd be very easy to just kind of throw in the towel, but they did end up fighting back. They did have a drive at the end of the game where they could have won the game or at least got it tied up with a field goal, but you know the ending drive was kind of a disaster. But I do give them credit for still fighting back, being down so much, and making it only a 3-point loss. But it's still a loss, and it's one we probably shouldn't have had. I don't know what the fuck that was from the defense. That cannot be the case. We need our defense to play elite, or we're not going to win games. So that's kind of my quick version of my thoughts on that game. If you guys really want me to break that down fully, you can let me know down in the comments if you really want to hear like a full-blown Steelers rant. But that puts my picks at 1 and 2. Next up, we had the Vikings at Packers. So the Vikings just continue to be, I think you can argue up until this point, they've been the best team in football because they're just rattling. They continue to rattle off wins against elite teams. They now have beaten their 3rd straight team that was a playoff team last year. Week 2, it was the Niners, who were the NFC champions last year. Week 3, it was the Texans. They won a playoff game last year. And then this week, they beat the Packers, who, again, another team that won a playoff game last year. So, you know, it'd be one thing if they were like, I know they beat the Giants week 1. I didn't take a whole lot out of that. If they were beating up on bad teams, it would be like, okay, whatever. But they're doing this against really, really good high-end football teams that were playoff teams last year. And they just continue to find a way to pull out wins. Their defense continues to really surprise me. I know Sam Darnold is really the big story with the Vikings, and he deserves all the credit. Right now, after Josh Allen just completely shit his pants, we'll talk about that game obviously a little later. But, you know, if you listened to me last week, I put out that MVP rankings. I had Sam Darnold at 2. I had Josh Allen at 1. Well, now with Josh Allen having a really bad performance in primetime against the Ravens and Sam Darnold continuing his dominance and beating another playoff team, I think it's kind of fair to say that Sam Darnold has moved to number 1 on the MVP ladder. But like I was saying about their defense, continues to be just as impressive as the reemergence of Sam Darnold because, again, I still don't really think they're a very talented group. When you look at their defensive roster on paper, it's not like a bunch of household guys. It's not like Aaron Donald and T.J. Watt and Jalen Ramsey are out there for the Vikings. It's a bunch of kind of lower drafted guys, not a ton of well-known guys, but yet they continue to just wreak havoc. And I think that and that is a massive credit to the defensive mastermind that is Brian Flores, who I think if his defense keeps this up with limited personnel, that he's going to get a head coaching job this offseason. I know he had issues with Tua in Miami, and that might turn some people off. But ultimately, all that matters is how the team produces. And right now, that defense is producing, making a case for being the best defense in football right now. So the Vikings just continue to really impress me. I picked them in this game just because I have more confidence in them. With Green Bay, this is not a good sign because you played 4 games thus far. The 2 games where your $200+ million quarterback and Jordan Love played, you lost both those games. And the 2 games where Malik Willis played, you won both those games. So that's just not a good sign. I think that kind of reflects more on how this team is set up. When they rely more on their run game, the offense and the team as a whole just kind of operates more smooth. Whenever they're asking Jordan Love to be like Superman and carry them, I just don't quite know if that is what Jordan Love is, at least at this point in time. And that's kind of concerning because that's what you paid Jordan Love to be. That's what Jordan Love looked like in a lot of spots last year, that back half of last year, that playoff game against the Cowboys. But if you listen to me in the offseason, I talked about this a lot, it was a really impressive run, but it was like half a season. Are we looking back on it now? That contract doesn't look great. I'm not saying I'm out on Jordan Love. I'm not saying that at all, but not a good performance coming back off injury, throwing 3 picks. And it's kind of ironic he wore a Brett Favre jersey walking into this game because that's who he looked like today. Brett Favre was the ultimate roller coaster at the quarterback position, and that's exactly what Jordan Love looked like. So kind of a disheartening loss for the Packers, even though this was a really close game. Ultimately, the reason they lost this game was their $200+ million quarterback, Jordan Love. So, like I said, I did pick Minnesota in that one, so I got that right. That puts my record at 2-2 for the week. Next, we had Jags at Texans. I did pick Houston in this one. They did end up winning this one, 24-20. They almost kind of blew it, but Jacksonville's done. We already talked about this after their embarrassing loss to the Bills, but this just feels like the final nail in the coffin. I'm honestly kind of surprised that Doug Peterson hasn't been fired. I think the only reason why he hasn't been fired is because who would become the interim coach? Once your season is kind of like already a loss, like at this point in time, no matter what the Jags do with their coaching staff, with Doug Peterson, no matter what change they make, they're going to be a bad team going forward for the rest of this season. They're in an 0-4 hole. They're just not a very good roster. I think the best way going forward, even though it's a tough sell to your fans, obviously the fans want to see wins, but just stick it out with Doug Peterson for this year because you get in a really tricky spot with interims. We saw this happen with the Raiders last year where they fired their head coach, they promote an interim, you start winning games with interims, and then the players and the fans kind of feel this connection with the new interim, and they want him to be the guy going forward, and that's not a good recipe for Jacksonville going forward. Jacksonville needs a clear-cut guy to just come in here and clean this organization up. As much as I like Doug Peterson, I think he's just worn out his welcome in Jacksonville. It's just clearly his message is not working. The roster's too limited. It needs a rehaul. And even though Trevor Lawrence, I think, is a guy you could put a lot of blame on this for, he ain't going nowhere. They just gave him $200 million. Trevor Lawrence is going nowhere for Jacksonville. So really, the biggest thing they can do to right the course of this ship that is the Jaguars is head coach. Don't bring an interim in there. Don't let that become like what happened with Antonio Pierce. Even though Antonio Pierce is doing a fine job, I don't know how that's going to play out long term, especially when you look at the other coaches in that division. So my thing would be, if I'm Jacksonville, just kind of let this ride. Silver lining is you're going to get a really high pick. Not going to be a quarterback probably, but maybe you could get like a James Pierce or a Travis Hunter or one of the sweet O-linemen like from LSU. And the big thing would be a change at head coach. Whether it's I've heard Belichick, I've heard his name starting to pop up a lot more and linked to Jacksonville. I don't know how realistic that is. Just for the simple fact, I don't know if Bill's going to want to go there. When you look at what's going on with Trevor Lawrence, how he's not playing very well, and Bill obviously still has high aspirations. Probably wants to win another Super Bowl. Definitely wants to get that all-time record of wins by a head coach. I think he's still, I looked it up a while back. I think he's like 21 wins away from being the all-time winningest coach. So with this current Jacksonville team, that would probably take a little while to get to 21 wins. So I don't know if he'd want to go there. Another name I'd throw out is Mike Vrabel. You know what Mike Vrabel brings to the table. Obviously, he's familiar with this division. So we're getting into speculative stuff, but, that's kind of all we can talk about with Jacksonville because there's just not a whole lot to talk about with their football team. They're 0-4, not playing good. Trevor Lawrence is a massive disappointment. Just don't really know what to do with them for the rest of this season. They're kind of a mess. But I did get that right with the Texans. So that puts me at 3-2 for the week. Here's a big one that I was I felt like I kind of went out on a limb on between the Saints and the Falcons because when you look back to, the first 2 weeks of the season, probably the most hyped up team in the entire league was the New Orleans Saints because they hung whatever it was, 44 or 47 on the Panthers, and then they went to Jerry World and just fucking bludgeoned the Cowboys. So a lot of people were riding high with the Saints, and then week 3 comes around. They only put up 12 on the terrible Eagles defense. And then this week, they lose to their in-division rival Falcons. I just think it comes back to what I said. Like, I have receipts on this stuff. I'm not just saying it now that the Saints are back to a 500 team. I was saying this back after the Saints beat the Cowboys is pump the brakes. This is still Derek Carr. This is still Dennis Allen. And when you look at the two teams that they kicked the shit out of, it was the Panthers, probably the worst team in the league, and the Cowboys defense, which we all know is supremely overrated and not very good. So when I told you guys pump the brakes, I think a lot of people were getting way over their head with the Saints. They were going too crazy for me. So I feel a little vindicated right now. And like I told you, Atlanta was a lot better than what their record reflected. I think Atlanta is going to be a playoff team this year, even though some of the stuff with the Falcons still kind of boggles my mind, particularly Kyle Pitts. I don't get it. I don't get why Kyle Pitts doesn't work because his first year as a rookie, he was actually pretty good. But since then has literally done nothing. And I felt like a lot of people, myself included, were like, hey, Kirk Cousins, someone who can actually throw the ball and be an actual good NFL quarterback, unlike Desmond Ridder. This is going to be big for Kyle Pitts' career, and it's just not translating. I don't know what the fuck the problem is with Kyle Pitts. I don't get it. I don't understand. Falcons fans, please let me know what the hell is going on with Kyle Pitts. They're just not using him. I don't know if they're not targeting him. He's not getting open. That's kind of a crisis for me. You can't really call Kyle Pitts a bust because he's still a good player. We've seen far worse players being taken in the top 5 where they're out of the league in a couple years or they're backups or they're on practice squads. Kyle Pitts is still a starting tight end, and I think he's going to continue to be a starting tight end in the NFL, but clearly is nowhere near what he was thought to be. A lot of people thought he had the upside to be like a Tony Gonzalez, and he's just not that at all. But overall, this is a very good win for the Falcons, beating their division rival. Now they're tied with the Saints. They have, obviously, the tiebreaker over the Saints going forward. So, massive win for Atlanta. Next was Rams at Bears. And I went with the Bears with this one for the simple fact that I get it. The Rams, they beat the 49ers, but I just don't think it's sustainable to win football games with the amount of injuries that have piled up on the LA Rams. And I get it. McVay's a mastermind. Matthew Stafford is still a very high-end elite talent at the quarterback position. But there's just too many key injuries to really important positions on this team to really sustainably win games. There's just not enough playmaking, especially with the wide receivers. The defense, to me, still feels very limited. They're definitely feeling the loss of Raheem Mostert, who was the defensive coordinator last year with the Bears. It's not like they lit it up either. Although DeAndre Swift finally woke up. He finally took his head out of his ass and had a massive game. He caught every pass that was thrown to him, had a massive game on the ground, had a touchdown. So good to see that. Good to see a pulse from DeAndre Swift because it looked like he was the worst signing of the offseason through the first 3 weeks. He finally had a monster game. That's what the Bears need. That is the recipe going forward for the Bears is they need a strong run game, whether it is with Swift or the other guy. Blanking on his name right now. That's going to drive me nuts that I can't think of the other guy's name. I think it starts with a J, but that's what Caleb Williams needs to win football games because They did this with Fields where they just threw Fields out there and they were like, hey, Justin, yeah, you're the savior of our team. Go out there, run around, and just fucking pull shit out of your ass, make plays. You can't do that again. You tried it with Mitch. You tried it with Fields. It looked like they were kind of starting to go that way with Caleb, but now that he finally got support from his run game, he didn't have to be like Superman, and they won the game. And I think that is the big recipe going forward. They need to put a massive emphasis on running the football and not asking Caleb to do everything for this offense. So good win here for the Bears. They're at 2-2. It feels like a lot of people were hitting the panic button, myself included, on the Bears. But they get back on track here. They're still 2-2. They're still very much alive for a wild card spot. Their defense looks really good, and like I said, if their run game continues to play like that, they're going to have a shot to win any game they're in. Next up was one of my biggest blunders of Week 4. Not my biggest. We'll talk about my biggest mistake, but this was one of my biggest mistakes in terms of my picks for this week, picking the Eagles to beat the Buccaneers. And that is because I had no idea how injured the Eagles were. You can go listen to my predictions. I thought A.J. Brown was playing this game. I don't know what the fuck I was thinking. I could have swore I heard some report or saw something on Instagram from like Schefter or whatever that A.J. Brown was back and was going to play in this game. That's a massive reason why I picked the Eagles to win this one, but they didn't play. He didn't play. Devonta Smith didn't play in this game, so it was kind of just this ragtag of guys. I don't even think Dotson played in this game. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but you basically have the Eagles practice squad at receivers out there in Dallas Goedert and Saquon, but no real playmaking on the perimeter from the receivers. That kind of would have been a nice thing to know before I picked the Eagles to win this one. But obviously, yeah, those guys didn't play, and it was kind of a pathetic performance from the Eagles. The Buccaneers just continue to own this team. If you look back, I think like the last 9 or 10 times these teams have played, the Buccaneers have won all the matchups. So I don't know what it is about this matchup, but the Buccaneers have owned the Eagles over the past couple of years. Obviously, they beat them in the playoffs last year. They beat them here. Baker gets back on track. Obviously, they kind of got humiliated by the Broncos last week. Baker played bad. He had a bounce-back game here. He looked really good. The Buccaneers, they just continue to be a really good team, and it's just that NFC South race is gonna be really fun come the later part of the year. I'm pretty sure they play this upcoming Thursday night. I can't remember if it's the Falcons or the Saints, but they play one of those two teams this upcoming Thursday night. So I can't wait for that, to see a big NFC South matchup, because this division is really fascinating. And the Buccaneers, they're looking like they're the cream of the crop in this division right now with a massive win over Philly. So I got that one wrong. That put my record at 5-3 for the week. Next up was Bengals at Panthers. So the Bengals finally got their first win. Obviously, I predicted them to win this. This was a must-win. If the Bengals would have lost this game and went down to 0-4, I would have officially pounded the gavel on their season, but they ended up pulling this one out, 34-24 in Carolina. So that puts my record at 6-3. With the Bengals, though, I'm going to continue to harp on this point, and it might be annoying because I've already said it a couple times, but I'm going to continue to say it because it's the truth. In the Joe Burrow era, they always get off to slow starts. Particularly last year, they got off to a bad start. They got humiliated by the Browns in Week 1, and it looked like they were kind of done, like their season was over. And then as the season went on, they started to look good again. And this always happens, like later, like midpoint of the season, later on in the season, they get hot and they look like a real contending team. I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen this year, because I still think they have massive problems. Their run game is nowhere near as effective as it was with Joe Mixon. They got problems with their line. Their defense is not as talented as it once was, but they still have that guy, Joe Burrow. They still have that guy, Jamar Chase. And I've said this time after time, anytime you have those two guys on a football field together, you're going to have a chance to win any game you're in. And for their sake, going forward, hopefully they can build off the momentum of this and, try to get back on track and kind of put some wins together. I haven't looked at their schedule, but I probably should do that just to see what they're up against. As a Steelers fan, obviously I hope their season continues to be kind of a mess, but they finally get their first win of the year here, beating a bad Panthers team. Next up, so like I said with the Eagles, that was one of my biggest blunders. This game was my biggest blunder of the week. The Commanders at the Cardinals. If you've listened to all my prediction videos for this season, you'll know that through the first 4 weeks, I've picked the Cardinals each week, and they went 1-3. So the Cardinals have really, really let me down. They were a team that I was very high on, and I was willing to put my money where my mouth was with the Cardinals, because I'm still really high on Kyler. I still think this offense is a lot more talented than people give it credit for. But, wow. Really, I mean, take aside my bias towards Kyler because he's my favorite non-Steeler. Take away the fact that I think the Cardinals are an underrated team. One of the biggest reasons why I picked the Cardinals in this one is because of really Jay Daniels. Because I was like, yeah, he looks sweet against the Bengals, but I don't think he's going to play like that every week. Like, I feel like that's kind of an unrealistic expectation for Jay Daniels, who had over a 90% completion percentage against the Bengals and was the sole reason why they beat the Bengals. I was like, he's not going to play like that every week. Like, you're going to have some rough games here and there. I was kind of expecting him to come back down to earth against the Cardinals. That didn't happen. Even though he threw a pick, he was still sensational in this game. And the efficiency kept up. He was still incredibly efficient in this one. As of right now, looks like the favorite to win Offensive Rookie of the Year by a mile. He looks like the best player from that draft thus far through 4 weeks. That guy's just he's a generational talent. That's what he looks like right now. He looks like the real deal. So it's time to start, especially for me, it's time to start really putting some respect on the Commanders, because they have number 5. And he is a monster. I mean, he is sensational. So for Cardinals, I don't know what to do with you guys. Like, I really, really had high hopes for the Cardinals. I never really picked them to be a playoff team, but I thought they'd be a really competitive, 8-win team. I just don't know now. They've let me down 3 out of the 4 weeks I've picked them. I don't know what I'm going to do with the Cardinals going forward, but big props to the Commanders. They got their guy there at quarterback. So that puts my record at 6-4 for the week. Next up was Patriots at Niners. We don't need to spend a whole lot of time on this one because it went exactly how I predicted it, and that was an absolute fucking bludgeoning of the Patriots by the 49ers. Yeah, I just think the Patriots, they played up the first 2 weeks where they beat the Bengals week 1. They took the Seahawks to overtime, but week 3, I think, really showed you what the Patriots really were when they got just absolutely shattered by the Jets. And that continues to happen with the Niners here. The Niners just absolutely beat their fucking head in with a baseball bat in this game. And I don't think it's really to anyone's surprise. So like I said, I'm not really going to talk about this too much. Not a surprising outcome whatsoever. I still think the Patriots are in that number 1 overall pick race. That has not changed in my eye. So that puts me at 7-4. Next up, I had Browns at Raiders. And I picked the Raiders, and I was actually seriously contemplating making a quick video, updating my pick here, because when I made that pick, I did not know that Max Crosby and Devontae Adams were going to be out. So I was like, hey, those are their 2 best players by a country mile. I kind of need to change my pick here to Cleveland. Well, I'm glad I didn't, because the Raiders ended up winning anyways, despite Crosby and Adams being out. And that is just an absolute fledgling disaster for the Cleveland Browns. With all the talent they have on this team, it's completely unacceptable to lose to this Raiders team. It really is. And I guess I'm willing to admit that I was kind of wrong about the Raiders, because I thought they were going to be really bad. They're a really scrappy football team. Maybe I should have seen that coming, just with the culture that Pierce established last year, and obviously is doing that even more this year. And after they beat the Ravens, I should have kind of realized this more. The Raiders are a very scrappy football team. They play very physical. The Browns are just an embarrassment. They're now 1-3, I believe. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I'm just thinking off the top of my head. I think the only win they have is against... they beat the Giants. I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure the Browns are 1-3 now. I probably should have written that down, but it's Deshaun. I don't want to really say too much because you've heard all my takes on Deshaun. He's just terrible, and he's very quickly sinking the ship that is the Cleveland Browns. He's just dragging them down. They're going to continue to be a nosedive as long as he's at the helm. Yeah, that is just an absolute... You can't even really put into words how big of a disaster Deshaun Watson is. So let's just move on. I'm glad I got the win there. That puts my record of the week at 8-4. Next one, Chiefs at Chargers. Pick the Chiefs here, and they just continue to find ways to win football games. They had a cataclysmic, terrible injury here. Rashee Rice, torn ACL. It's feared that he's going to be out for the season. That makes me want to cry because I have him in fantasy, and he was fucking killing it for me in fantasy. But just for the Chiefs, though, I mean, that just add that to another massive injury on offense, Before the season even started, we found out, I think like a couple hours before that game, before the Ravens, we found out Hollywood Brown is probably going to miss the entire season. So that kind of sucked. Then, I think it was week 3 or week 2, Isaiah Pacheco goes out, just completely shattered his knee. They think he might be out for the season. He was probably the second most important player in their offense behind Mahomes, at least those first 2 weeks he was. And then Rashee Rice, by far their best receiver, who was killing it, had an incredible game against the Falcons in week 3, and he is now potentially gone for the entire season. So if this were any other football team, I would be really, really worried, but it's the Chiefs. They find a way to win, even though they have all this collection of injuries, even though Kelsey continues to be very disappointing. They're 4-0. They don't lose games. It's because the magic of Mahomes, the magic of Andy Reid. So it sucks. It really does. But I don't see the Chiefs going anywhere just because they are that good. They have Reid and Mahomes. It's hard to ever see me picking against them. They just, no matter what, find a way to win. So that puts me at 9-4. Of course, next we had probably the biggest game of week 4, Sunday Night Football, Bills at Ravens. I picked the Bills here because up until that point, through the first 3 weeks, they look like the best team in football. And I talked about that ad nauseum, how good their offense looked. They're no longer like force-feeding Diggs. It's much more of a spread-out offense. James Cook was really changing the dynamic of this offense. But the Ravens, this kind of felt like a must-win game for them. And obviously it was in Baltimore. And, it just goes back to what I said after week 1. Look what happens when you use Derrick Henry, a Hall of Fame running back who's still in his prime. They gave him 13 carries in week 1, and John Harbaugh comes out, a couple days after that and is like, yeah, we didn't really bring Derrick Henry in here to, have 25 carries or whatever and, carry the offensive load. Why the fuck did you sign him then? And then I guess this light bulb went off in Todd Monken's head where he was like, hey, would you look at that? We have a Hall of Fame running back. Why don't we just fucking use him? Well, let's just try to use him. And look what happened against the Cowboys. And look what happened again this week. When you give Derrick Henry the fucking ball, when you let him do his thing, get his rhythm going, he fucking annihilates people. And he continues to prove that he's still, even at the ripe age of 30, he's still one of the best players in the NFL. So that is that is insane for the Ravens, the fact that they were, those first 2 weeks, not really using Derrick Henry. They could have really changed their season. They could be 4-0 right now had they used Derrick Henry effectively in those first 2 games against the Chiefs and the Raiders. Now they're starting to use him. It's not only a positive for the fact that your offense looks better, but number 2, you're also not asking Lamar to just carry the team like he had to do in certain spots last year. So big props to the Ravens. Massive win here. I felt like a lot of people were starting to hit the panic button on the Ravens after they went down 1-2. That wasn't the case for me. Or I guess they didn't go 1-2. Oh no. Yeah, I can't remember. It's all kind of jumbled in my head, but I don't know. Regardless, I felt like they were kind of starting to get a little panicky with the Ravens. But they showed in this game that they are still absolutely Super Bowl contenders. And that's something that I was kind of talking about earlier in the season. I was like, maybe their Super Bowl window is closed. Look what they just did to the Bills. And with the Chiefs' depletion of key injuries, we're going to talk about that more as the year goes on. The AFC feels wide open. And I hate to say that because we were saying that all last year and the Chiefs fucking won it all again. But these injuries for the Chiefs as the year goes on, I think are really going to come back to bite them in the ass unless they make a big trade. But big props to the Ravens here. Derrick Henry's looking like a monster. If they just continue to use Derrick Henry and he looks like this, he might be the offensive player of the year, the way he's looking. And then we had, of course, last night, Monday Night Football, the 2 slate of games. I'll be honest with you guys, I didn't watch a second of Titans at Dolphins. There was no fucking way that was getting on my TV, especially whenever we had a great game between Seattle and Detroit. There was no way I was going to change the channel to go to that fucking shit show that was Titans at Dolphins. So I will say, though, about that, I did pick the Titans because I was like, when you're the Dolphins, you're rolling out there with Skylar Thompson, you're not going to win any games. Well, they did roll out with Skylar Thompson. They went with Huntley instead, and he was basically just as bad as Skylar Thompson. So not really a shocker there. Again, I don't know why the Dolphins don't just go get Tannehill. I'm not saying Tannehill's like a fucking MVP candidate or something, but I mean, he's had a lot of success whenever you put a lot of pieces around him. He had a lot to work with in Tennessee. He had great run support, a pretty good O-line. He had A.J. Brown. You put him in this Miami offense with Devon Achane and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and really good play calling. I think Tannehill could do a whole hell of a lot better than the guys that they've been trotting out there since Tua got hurt. I don't get that. For Tennessee, like I said, if Tennessee wants to win games, I said this. It's not like some big hot take because I feel like a ton of people were saying this, but I did say it a couple weeks in a row leading up to this game. If the Titans want to win games this year, they have to bench Will Levis because he has single-handedly been the reason why they've lost games. That Bears game, their defense was really good in that one. They should have won that game. They lost because Will Levis single-handedly gave up that game. The Green Bay game, Will Levis single-handedly costed them that game. The Jets game, Will Levis single-handedly costed them that game. And he came out there, he started this game terribly yet again, and they benched him for my guy Mason Rudolph, and they turned out to put up 31 points. So that's the winning recipe going forward. And I've been saying this, even though the Titans have been really bad, I've still been saying that they still have good players. There are parts of this team that I like. Their defense has been a lot better than people give it credit for. They still have good skills position players. Will Levis has been so fucking dreadfully bad. He was the worst starting quarterback through the first 3 weeks of the season. That's why they were 0-3. And then you just put in a competent quarterback there with Mason Rudolph, and they put up 31 points. So not really a big mystery there why the Titans won that one. And then we had the incredible Seahawks at Lions. I watched every second of this game. This game was a absolute blast. This was a thrill ride back and forth. No defense. If you like defense, you would not have liked this game because both these teams played zero defense. So good on Detroit for winning this one, of course, but that is a bit of an area of concern going forward is like whenever they get to match up against some of the better teams. Like Seattle's a really good team for sure. I definitely think Seattle's going to be a playoff team this year, especially with Geno playing how he's played. But I still wouldn't put Seattle like in the upper echelon of the NFL. I still think that's like the Niners, obviously the Chiefs, the Bills, the Ravens. Even though they're struggling, I still think the Eagles could probably get to that point if Jalen can play better and they get healthy. Like they play some of those level teams. I still think that's a massive area of concern because their defense was getting carved apart by Geno Smith. Their defense was bad, particularly the secondary still continues to be a big problem. And I thought that they did a good job of like addressing that in the offseason, especially with drafting Tyrion Arnold, bringing in Carlton Davis. Carlton Davis was terrible in this game. Had like 4 or 5 PIs on him where he like just completely costing the Lions drives in this game with DK. Like he was really, really struggling out there. I don't know why they just continued to leave Carlton Davis on DK. Like he was clearly struggling in that matchup, and they just continued to let him guard DK Metcalf, and it was rough. But you got to give Jared Goff a ton of credit. This was like the best version of Jared Goff we've seen. Broke an NFL record. I'm pretty sure he's the only NFL quarterback to throw for over 10 attempts and complete all of his passes. He went 18 of 18 in this game. He was perfect. So big kudos to Jared Goff. The run game continued to be spectacular in this. That's the winning recipe for the Lions, is just lean on that spectacular running back tandem of Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Lean on your offensive line. They even had, one of the better trick plays of the season too, kind of like a version of the Philly special. Amon-Ra St. Brown threw a touchdown to Jared Goff. And now there's like all these memes going around. Jared Goff has more receiving touchdowns than all these other guys out there. So just fascinating to see. So I will give credit, though, to Seattle. Even though in a losing effort, they still looked good. There were still some big, like really positive takeaways for Seattle. Number one, Geno Smith looks really, really good. I had him as one of those guys tied at number 5 on my MVP ladder. He might be moving up because even though he lost, or the Seahawks lost, it was not to the fault of Geno Smith. It was to the fault of their defense. Geno Smith was really, really good in this game. He continues to play basically at an MVP caliber thus far through the first 4 weeks of the season. DK Metcalf looked really good in this one, and Kenneth Walker looked really, really good in this one as well. Kenneth Walker, I was kind of concerned for him because he's coming off that injury again. He's been a guy that struggled with injuries throughout his young NFL career. He's had a lot of injury problems. So that's why I was like kind of worried about him coming. I'm like, are they rushing him back for this game? I don't know if he's quite ready. They have Charbonnet. Maybe they should, rest him a little more. But he went out there and just went insane. I know he had one, maybe he had 2 touchdowns. He was incredible making plays. He had one of the best plays of the year thus far where he flipped out of a tackle and then ran for a first down. I mean, he is an absolute freak. So even though Seattle lost a lot of key takeaways, but you got to give, obviously, the most credit to the Lions because they were able to pull this out. Jared Goff was really good in that run tandem. So that has been it for my Week 4 recap, whatever you want to call it. That now puts my record of the season at 40-24. So we're starting to get back on track with my picks. I want to have more weeks like this as opposed to Week 2 and Week 3. But let me know down in the comments how your picks did. What were some of your favorite picks this week that you got right? And definitely let me know how is your NFL team doing this season. If you made it this far in the video, really appreciate you listening to me ramble here. Please like and subscribe.